Thank you, everyone. This is Siwar Madkouri. I'm from Tunisia. I'm a human rights advocate and gender-based violence and sexual rights specialist. بالعربية السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أود أن أتقدم جزيل الشكر لمؤسسة مات على إتاحة هذه الفرصة. كما أود أن أعبر عن امتناني لجميع القائمين على هذا الحدث، وأشكر جميع المتحدثين على مساهمتهم القائمة. I will jump to English. I would like to sincerely thank the Maat Foundation for providing this opportunity, and I also extend my appreciation to all the organizers of this webinar for their effort in making this event possible. I also thank all the speakers for their valuable contribution, and it's really a pleasure to deliver this intervention in English. Imagine with me a young girl in a rural community in Africa. Every morning before going to school, she walks a long distance just to collect water that is often unsafe to drink. Now, imagine that somewhere in the world, funding has already been allocated to ensure she has access to clean water. Projects have been designed, reports have been written, commitments have been made. And yet, her reality has not changed. This is not only a short story about a lack of resource, it's a story about lack of accountability. Today, as we discuss achieving SDG 6, we must ask ourselves a critical question. How do we ensure that commitment made on paper translate into real change in people's lives? To better understand this gap, it is important to first define what we mean by accountability mechanism. An accountability mechanism refers to a system of process, institution, and tools through which actors are held responsible for their commitment, decision, and action. This mechanism ensures that those in power, whether government or international donor, are required to explain their action, provide transparent information, and face consequences if commitments are not met. Accountability rests on three essential pillars: transparency, access to information, answerability, obligation to discussion, enforcement, capacity to ensure corrective action. Without these three elements, accountability risks becoming symbolic rather than transformative. Having clarified the concept, we can now explore how it is translated into practice through different types of accountability mechanism. Accountability, it's not a single tool. It's a system composed of multiple interconnected mechanisms. First, we have institutional mechanisms such as national audit, parliamentary oversight, and judicial system. These are formal structures that monitor how public and donor funds are used. Second, donor and international mechanism, including monitoring and evaluation framework, reporting system, and the global review process. Third, social accountability mechanism driven by civil society, communities, and youth. First, digital accountability tools, which use technology to enhance transparency through open data platforms, real-time reporting, and public access to information. Finally, multi-stakeholders mechanism, which bring together government, donors, civil society, and the private sector to jointly monitor progress and ensure shared responsibility. Each of these mechanisms plays a role, but their effectiveness depends on how well they are integrated, resources, and inclusive. But the key question remains, why are these mechanisms particularly critical for achieving SDG 6? Achieving the SDG 6 is not only a question of funding, it's a question of how that funding is governed. Across Africa, we face a significant financing gap, but equally important is the accountability gap. Global evidence shows that the accountability system for water and sanitation are often fragmented, under-resourced, weak in enforcement, and lacking inclusive participation. In many cases, there is limited access to disaggregated data, making it difficult to track whether funding is reaching the communities that need it most. As a result, we risk a situation where funds are committed but not effectively used, projects are implemented but not sustained, and inequalities persist or even deepen. When we examine these challenges more closely, we identify a critical missing link, the role of youth in accountability system. One of the most critical gaps is in current accountability frameworks is the limited and non-institutionalized participation of youth. Participation, yes? Um, Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you properly. We
Okay.
can hear you.
So, as I said, the participation often remains ad hoc and disconnected from decision-making process. Yet, young people are the largest demographic in Africa, highly engaged in community action, and increasingly equipped with digital tools for monitoring and advocacy. This creates a clear contradiction. Those most affected by development outcomes are often excluded from accountability process. To close the gap, the accountability gap, we must move from youth as beneficiaries to youth as accountability actors. Moving from this gap, we must also examine accountability at a higher level, specifically how international donors themselves are held responsible. International donors play a central role in financing SDG 6, but their accountability mechanism face several limitations. First, many systems rely on self-reporting and voluntary frameworks, which reduces their effectiveness. Second, there is often a focus on outputs rather than impact. For example, the number of water points built rather than long-term access, sustainability, or equity. Third, data transparency remains inconsistent, limiting the ability of external actors to track funding and outcomes. And finally, civil society and youth engagement, it's not systemically embedded in donor accountability process. This weakness both trust and effectiveness. This brings us to a deeper question. Can accountability truly be effective without a rights-based approach? Access to water and sanitation, it's not only a development target, it is a fundamental human right. Therefore, accountability must go beyond financial tracking to address equity, inclusion, and justice. We must ask who benefits from investment, who is left behind, and how can system be corrected. A rights-based approach ensures that accountability it's not only about efficiency but about dignity and fairness. Building on this understanding, we can now turn to a practical recommendation to strengthen accountability system. First, institutionalize youth participation by creating formal rules for young people in monitoring, evaluation, and decision-making platforms. Second, strength transparency and open data system by ensuring that donor funding is publicly accessible, disaggregated, and user-friendly. Third, invest in a accountability system, including youth-led monitoring initiative, civil society watchdog, and capacity building programs. Fourth, integrate the social and digital accountability tools to combine top-down and bottom-up monitoring approach. Five, strength informants mechanism by moving beyond voluntary reporting toward clear benchmarks, structured follow-up, and consequences for non-performance. However, this recommendation cannot be implemented in isolation. They require strong and inclusive partnership. So, in conclusion, accountability mechanisms are not merely technical tools, they are the bridge between commitment and real impact. If we are serious about achieving SDG 6 in Africa, we must ensure that every investment is transparent, accountable, and responsive to community needs. Youth are ready to lead this transformation. What is needed now is a space, trust, and investment so that accountability is not an afterthought but a driving force for sustainable and equitable development. Thank you.